everybody and welcome back to Gamer Muscle Videos, the home of virtual reality, sim racing and spending too much money on your hobby that your partner disapproves of. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the SW20 direct drive wheel, and this will also, what we say in this video will also apply to any OSW kit that uses the small mage and pretty much any OSW kit. But we're going to be taking a look at this force feedback wheel along with Assetto Corsa. Now we're going to start off by going through settings, and then I'm just going to talk about how good Assetto Corsa force feedback feels with this steering wheel. So basically, if you don't have a direct drive wheel and you've got money in your bank account, don't watch this because it will whet your appetite. So, without further ado, let's start off with the settings. Now, those of you that aren't familiar with direct drive wheels, basically, when you've got these OSW kits, most of them use either granity for the force feedback or the MOS force feedback drivers, or a combination of two. Now, basically, the MOS force feedback lets you set up your wheel, wheel rotation, wheel strength, and everything else very much the same as the Thrustmaster or Logitech profiler. Now, the settings I've been using for Assetto Corsa over the last month or so since we've been driving with this SW20 are such on the screen here. 900 degrees rotation, 1 times gain on the steering stop, but actually I often turn that down. I don't mind having a sort of damp steering stop so that when it does hit that, it's more of a soft bump rather than a really solid jolt. That's totally down to your preference, doesn't really make much difference. I have the overall filter on 7, max force 100%, all this is set to off, and that all works fine in terms of the MOS settings. Now, what I have found, this is the sort of important part, is it seems to be better to have the max force on 100% in MOS, and then to change your force feedback strength in game in order to maximize the resolution of the force feedback signal that is coming from the software. I don't know if this is placebo, but it seemed to me if I ran MOS at 50% and the game at 100%, it was a little bit less, there's a little bit less information than if I run MOS at 100% and the game at 50%. Maybe that is placebo, but that was just the impression I got. So in terms of the actual game settings of the force feedback, what we have are the gain on the main force feedback at 70% and slip effect at 29%. Obviously, it's totally up to you. You will definitely find that you probably don't want road effects and curb effects on because they're already very pronounced in Assetto Corsa. If not overly pronounced in Assetto Corsa with the direct drive wheel, maybe they could have been even more muted. But slip effect is nice because it gives you that nice sort of wheel shake, a little bit of undulation if you're overdriving the fronts of the tires and the fronts are losing grip, which you don't necessarily get as defined if you don't have the slip effect on. And actually, I think that's pretty mirrors some aspects of the sort of steering shake that you get in real cars. And I found 29% on there is more than fine. Again, that's totally subjective. Everything else is the standard affair for your force feedback with other wheels. Obviously, all pedal settings linear. No, don't need to bother about minimum force or filters or anything like that. Now, the gain is at 70% because most cars you'll tend to put at say 60-70% in game. To talk about the force feedback and the specific car settings, we're going to use the Lotus 311. Now, I've picked this vehicle because it is one of my sort of stealth favourite cars in this simulator, and especially when it comes to its force feedback, it has really tight, I assume it's got really tight suspension, but it just has a really tight handling characteristic, and the vehicle is really tight, but it's also a car in the sense that it's not a ridiculous race car that's so tight that it's muted. So you get the sort of benefit of a car that moves around a bit but is also tight like a race car. It's the perfect balance of vehicle. And I think if you were twiddling and fiddling with your force feedback settings, for example, and you wanted to dial it in for road cars and then say formula cars in the sim, the Lotus 311 is a really good vehicle to go to as a sort of middle, absolute bang smack in the middle of the road car in Assetto Corsa to set things up with. Okay, so jumping into the vehicle, and you'll see I've got the force feedback controller on the screen, and you can see we've set the vehicle to 80%. Now that's because with the game settings on 75%, it generally then seems to be a case of just tweaking each car from between 80 to 100%, depending on your personal preference. And you know, a lot of it really is down to personal preference. And what I've really found with this SW20 wheel is that sometimes, actually, let's start with cars in front of us. Restart the session. Teleport the cars back to the grid. What I found is, though you'll be driving a car that in reality wouldn't output 15 to 18 newton meters of torque in its normal driving, what I tend to find is that I like to have the force feedback on moderately high, so that it really increases the illusion and feel in the sense of G-forces when you go around a corner. Of course, if you've ever sat in a real car around a racetrack, the most noticeable aspect of it is the G-forces. And unfortunately, in the driving simulator, you don't have that. And the best approximation, in my opinion, for G-forces at this point in time are the forces that come through the steering wheel. So by setting up the force feedback so that you're on about, in this car for example, 80%, it's really nice and light at low speed. As you get to higher speeds, you feel the car load build up. So it'll be a combination of tyre load from the down forces and a whole bunch of other things, depending on how they program the force feedback in Assetto, of course, in the various sims. But as you go faster, you feel it load up, you feel it build up, which really gives you a nice immersive sense that you're actually getting G-forces, and also has the bonus of stopping you from overdriving the vehicle, because you then have more to push against and more, there's a resistance there that you're turning into, which encourages you to actually drive more subtly when you are at higher speed. You also find, or I've found personally, by having the force feedback on moderately high, I tend to get a better feel for the lower forces when at low speed. So when you're going through the tight corner, like T1 on this circuit, for example, and you're getting on the gas, the force feedback, despite having this potentially 20 Newton meter mini-mage motor in terms of its output, the forces are actually still quite weak with this wheel. But by having the game scaled such that it's maybe outputting more than what it would in reality through the actual steering wheel, you have a really good feel for the subtle effects as to how much you're slipping and little bits of aligning to make sure that you don't put a bit too much gas on and needlessly start sliding out of the corner. So this corner, for example, really light force feedback, but you can feel the exact moment that you've got grip, or when it's starting to lose it, or when you're pushing too hard. And if you run the cars with lower force feedback, that's not as noticeable. Though, compared to your average consumer wheels, your sort of T300, TSPC Racer, Fanatec wheels, G29 and all those, even if you were to run this on like 10% force feedback, you're still getting 5-6 times the amount of information that you get from those wheels. So moving away from that in terms of the general nature of how I like to have the strength and the reasons why, let's talk a bit about what it actually feels like to drive Assetto Corsa with a direct drive wheel. And in my opinion, Assetto Corsa has the best force feedback out of all the simulators in terms of conveying not only the G-forces, but all the little subtle nuances of what the tyres are doing, what's going on in the car. There's a constant communication through the force feedback to the driver that lets you drive from feel. And personally, that's what I'm into with driving simulators. It's all about driving from the feel. I don't like the whole rote memorization process, which you have to do that with every simulator. You have to learn where breakpoints are through practice. You have to learn lines around corners through practice. But once you know those basic, once you know the basic breakpoints and the basic lines, I get my enjoyment from feeling out what the car is telling me through the force feedback. And I have to say, with the SW20, it's just absolutely extraordinary the amount of feel you get. And for example, when you get on the brakes, you can really concisely feel the load of the vehicle moving out. So there where I got the brakes through there, I felt a really nice analog subtle communication that I was putting the brake on, the car wanted to sort of trip over itself and start understeering, and there was this constant communication happening there that lets you really understand why putting on a certain amount of brake pressure will cause which outcome. And you do, what's really nice with AC actually is you do get a degree of that with the consumer wheels with the G29, T300, TSPC Racer. You do get a degree of that, and it's one of the better simulators in terms of communicating through force feedback. But I have to say, with the direct drive wheels, and especially with this SW20, or I assume any other small mage kit or better, it's just absolutely phenomenal, the detail that you get and the sort of resolution of that communication of what the car's doing. And it really is quite analogous to my experience of being sat in a real car going around a track. Unfortunately, I haven't driven a real car around a racetrack, but I've been a passenger in a couple of cars around tracks. So, you know, I'll have to relate it to that. And the forces over the entirety of my body rather than what was going through the steering wheel in that occasion. So, just, I mean, again, okay, so going around the faster corners, what immediately stands out is you've got the load through the corner there, telling you what the overall G-forces are doing to the car and what the car really wants to do from how much grip it's got. But then you also can feel the tyres skipping over the small bumps in the road surface, which gives you a really good communication of how much lateral grip the car's got going through the corner, and if the car is struggling to get through that corner. And it also gives a sense of the car actually, or the tyres, trying to bite the road and actually work in your favour. And what I found with the more consumer-based wheels is that you get the overall G load, but you don't get the subtle effects to the same extent, or the subtle effects tend to be more drowned out by the larger effects. I think the TSPC Racer actually, and I haven't used the Club Sport V2 base, but from people that I trust and what they've said from it, I think those wheels, the TSPC Racer Club Sport V2, right, they've just updated actually, but those consumer wheels I think do probably the best in terms of conveying some subtle details on top of having load through them. But other than that, if you've got any of the other wheels, you tend to just lose that subtle resolution, the tiny little bumps and undulations once you're putting those wheels under load. So another really fantastic thing with this wheel and Assetto Corsa is the self-aligning and the sheer rotational speed. But the fact that it really is linked up with what's going on in this simulator, and the wheel very rarely feels dislocated to what's going on in the sim. And it's almost actually as if the wheel is, I mean, it's not almost, it is a case that this wheel is effectively a cheat. It's pay to win, pay to win, in that the self-aligning is so immediate with this wheel that you really don't have to worry about catching the cars manually. I'll try and paint a better picture of that. One of the things with consumer wheels is they don't particularly have the fastest of rotational speed. So what you end up doing as a driver driving with those wheels is you kind of have to preemptively drive over the top of the simulator. So you learn from experience that when the back end comes out and what's going on visually on the screen, at what point you need to react and catch the car is through experience and trial and error. Whereas with this direct drive wheel, what you find is that the car basically catches itself, and that's the case with real cars. You'll notice if you're driving your road car or even go-karts, they, less so with go-karts because they've got such a short wheelbase, they will just spin around in certain conditions. But with most normal vehicles, if they're set up in a safe way, they make it hard to actually lose control of themselves. They really do try and bring themselves back in and point the right direction. So let's, what I'll try and do, this obviously isn't a drift car. This car's obviously not designed to slide around corners, but we'll try and get the back end out in a ludicrous way, and you'll see how the wheel... I'll just put myself in a four-wheel slide there. Okay, you see how the wheel is really quickly pulling itself back. We'll try and be naughty here. And it really is the wheel here doing the work, rather than me doing it. It's really hard for you to see on a video. I know from before when I had direct drive wheels, I used to watch people driving with direct drive wheels, and you'd be like, oh, that looks really good, but I can't see what the wheel's doing and what the driver's doing. It's very hard to convey visually, other than me just saying. But for the most part, the car is driving itself and it's keeping itself in line. Another aspect of that is not just when you come out of corner and say I get on the gas and the car straightens itself up and the wheel does the work for you, but also when you go into braking on, say you're going into a downhill corner and you've got a car that has a lurchy rear end. With the consumer wheels, for example, you'll find that you put the brake on, the back might just come out, and there might not be any communication for that as to why that's happening. With this wheel, you put your brake on, the back starts coming out, and the wheel tugs on you quite aggressively, not only to automatically correct that slide that's happening, but also if you're holding the wheel stable yourself, that gives you a lot of information as to how much, if you're putting on too much brake, or if you want to work with that slide to your advantage. It's just absolutely extraordinary. And it, again, with the with belt-driven consumer wheels, you just don't get that degree of fidelity and just a sheer range of communication from it. You do get the basics, and you might get the initial impulse, but you then have to use that to drive the wheel yourself, because it doesn't have the force feedback for the car to basically drive itself as it would in reality. So, self-aligning, absolutely bloody amazing. Communication of force feedback, absolutely bloody amazing. Building some arm muscles through the strength of the wheel, absolutely amazing. No, actually, I think it is a little bit of a misconception, the whole, you know, it's really strong force feedback, so it'll build your muscles. What you actually find is, and again, I'd assume this applies to real race cars, obviously stronger force feedback does take more effort, and it will tire you out more than if you've got weaker force feedback. But what I've definitely found, and I noticed when first driving with the AccuForce wheel actually, direct drive wheels tend to only be a lot of effort to drive with if you're actually driving badly and if you're over driving the car. If you work with the car and work with the flow of the track and take the car through the path of the least resistance and generally drive in a way that's conducive to the fastest times, it will be less effort on you as a driver. So you can actually have these wheels on really high force feedback strength and not end up getting totally exhausted from it. You know, when I first got the wheel, plugged it in, as I said, I think it was about 2 months ago now, the high force feedback was just totally overwhelming, and I had pains on my shoulder, and my arm muscle here were hurting quite a bit. But literally after a month of that, you get used to it, and you know, you must just build basic strength. Obviously it's not working out, it's nothing like doing pull-ups or anything, and it's now perfectly comfortable to be running at around about what feels as if it's not the full 20 newton meters coming out the wheel of torque, but for, you know, for the most part, sort of around about 15 to 18 or so newton meters. But you know, you're not driving with it doing the full force at all times. It's only at high speed, and normally high speed corners you're being more gradual. So you know, you just get used to it. And the only reason I've really found to ever turn down the force feedback is generally to not make too much noise, because if you're running on really high force feedback and you go over rumble strips, for example, especially in our factory tip, if you're driving really high force feedback, it makes a lot of noise because your sim rig starts pounding the floor because the wheel is that strong. Other than that, if I'm trying to be stealthy like a Klingon warbird, trying to attack the Enterprise. Other than that, I just like having the force feedback on strong, and I find you just get used to it, and it's not a pain on your arms or your wrists, because you drive in a way that accommodates that strength. All right, let's jump into Lotus Type 49. Absolutely glorious vehicle. You know, I could do with one of these to do your Asda shopping. That'd be nice. And hopefully this vehicle will make some of the aspects of the force feedback more obvious in terms of what it's doing without me touching it. Now, I pushed the brakes there, the clutch then. You will notice I'm not heel and toe in. That's because I'm wearing socks and I don't want to get out my sim rig to put some shoes on. Whoa, I truly am that lazy. And unfortunately, I end up cutting up the side of my foot if I heel and toe without trainers on. I need some driving shoes with a rubber on the side of them. That'd be nice. So this car, I've got it set up on, it's on 99, so 75 in the game, 99 for the vehicle. Really heavy, but it's so in tune with what the vehicle's doing. It just feels. I mean, it's really, you know, using these words doesn't really actually convey what it feels like, but there's so much communication from the sim through the force feedback, and the car is driving itself so much that you just feel so connected to it. And I think actually another aspect of having stronger force feedback that really helps, and to some extent you do notice this with the consumer wheels actually as well. One of the nice things with probably the Cutterport V2 and say my TSPC Racer that I've got over say a T300 or the G29, one thing you do find with stronger force feedback is that it gives a sense of you having car mass. So it really does add to the believability of feeling as if you're moving around something that does weigh a ton or so, and that you're not just driving a remote control car, which is really what simulated vehicles can feel like when you're playing with some of the lower strength consumer wheels. This car is this is amazing. I mean, what's a shame is that you don't just have sim rigs in town centres where you could jump in and do a half-hour drive with this car, with a direct drive wheel. You know, that would be enough. That's a little bit of a fix. But half an hour with this car, on this track, in virtual reality, with a direct drive wheel set up correctly. Whoa, front end lifting off. It's, you know, to me, whoa, dear God, we've lost control there. Oh no. Ah dear. That was not successful driving. I think we've got damage on low, so we're good to keep going. Let's move the mouse, we've got opportunity. Move the mouse off that. To me, driving this car with this wheel, it's more, and in virtual reality, so VR does definitely add a lot to the experience. It's a more exciting experience than going on a theme park roller coaster like the Nemesis at Alton Towers, for example, which I've had the joy of riding about 20-30 times, so that's probably why that roller coaster is not a thrill. I have to we need to go to America at some point and go on what is it, Superman, Incredible Hulk ride. There's a couple of really nice roller coasters in America. UK, we don't really have that many roller coasters, so we have to make do with driving simulators. But just phenomenal that... Oh, someone's retired. Probably the guy that drove into me, or I drove into. Absolutely phenomenal, the amount of feel you get through the wheel and the amount you can feel the vehicle driving itself. And as I say, I think Assetto Corsa is one of the... well, in my opinion, it's the best simulator for overall force feedback, especially with a direct drive wheel, especially in terms of the overall package of what the force feedback communicates and what's going on. Oh my god, sorry about this drunk driving, talking and driving. It's so hard, guys, so hard. So you know, I've just said a whole load of positives, and it is worth pointing out some negatives of direct drive wheels. And I think one of the negatives, can't be all, you know, it's a rule, you just can't be positive all the time. Oh, that's awesome. We're being positive again now. Coming down the hill here, just feel it on the brakes. As I was touching the brake and stabbing at it rather erratically, like a bit like a murder in an episode of Game of Thrones on the brake pedal. As I was pushing it through the force feedback, I just felt really gentle tugs of the car moving down, the mass of the car moving around. Negatives, come on! It's not that hard to be negative. I'm British. It should just come naturally. One thing I've definitely found in Assetto Corsa, the two big negatives with the force feedback and the direct drive wheel. One of them is that with some cars and on some tracks, there seems to be a rather over-exaggeration of the suspension effects. So you go over some curbing, and the jolt and bumps you get through the wheel are just ludicrous. It feels as if you're driving over bricks at times. It doesn't feel natural or right, really, and it doesn't seem to correspond to the. Well, we don't have that many gears. It doesn't correspond to the size of the curbing. So, for example, this issue will happen. If we go onto the edge of a track here, when you've got like the road going to the grass, and say you dip a tyre over, there you go. That is like a stupendous bump through the force feedback. It's a really sudden jolt. Whereas, you know, I wouldn't have thought you'd you'd feel the transition from road to grass, and you might feel the car tugging in certain ways, but it feels like you're driving over next door neighbour's cat or something. It's really exaggerated, but fortunately it's not with every single car, it's not on every single track. It seems to be car specific, so I think it might be a quirk with some of the car's force feedback. And then separate to that, the only other really big negative I think is that one thing you get with direct drive wheels is that you can't fully let go of the wheel and have the car drive exactly as I think a real car would, in terms of when the car starts sliding because you've gone over the tyre limit, or just allow the car to 100% correct itself as I think it might do in reality, because you do get some oscillation still. So, you know, when you let go of the force feedback wheel with consumer wheels around the centre, you notice they sort of flop left and right. You have a degree of that with direct drive wheels, and it can be really quite aggressive, especially. What gear are we in? Especially when you're when you've got the force feedback on high and you're really pushing it, or you do something a bit over the top. Now, fortunately, Kunos did put in a sort of gyroscopic force feedback effect, and that makes most cars feel really, really good. And as I say, I do think AC has the best force feedback, especially with the direct drive wheels, out of all the simulators. But not all cars seem to take into account that gyroscopic effect fully, and so I'd put that in as an issue with the simulator and its force feedback. And I have heard in general, when it comes to direct drive wheels, it is a problem with all the simulators, and it's a problem with direct drive wheels in that the only real solution, supposedly, I'm not that technical, so I don't know for sure. The only real solution is for, rather than force feedback being based on the wheel trying to be in a certain position from what the simulator's telling it, for the force feedback to be delivered through the sim giving out a impulse. Whoa dear, we lost the back there. So there's plants there everywhere, there's pink weeds. Yeah, so I think, you know, that is something that could be improved with all sims, but it's probably going to come down to a fundamental driver level solution. But absolutely extraordinary, and you know, I think the thing is, you know, obviously with direct drive wheels, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of upfront cost. I think this SW20, which, as I say, Ollie sent me. Full disclosure, I didn't buy it. Ollie sent it to me, but we've used this one. I've used a kit one previously, and I've used the AccuForce wheel. All those wheels, they're all really nice, especially compared to the average consumer wheels. Despite them costing, you know, upwards of £700, I think this wheel is 750 quid normally, plus say 100 for a wheel and some buttons. Despite that upfront cost, the chances are, especially with OSW kits, they're not going to ever really break, and they're only ever going to improve after you've bought them, because the improvements are all really on the software side. The hardware with these wheels is such that it really is overkill. The small Mage motor and the encoder and everything is totally overkill. The circuitry as well, the SimuCube hardware, and then the accompanying boards and gubbins that are in there, all total overkill for the application of sim racing. So really it is just a case of software improvement. So say you do go out and end up risking getting murdered by your partner, be that your wife or your boyfriend, I should say wife or husband, either. Say you do risk that. The fact is, if you know you're really into driving simulators, and you know it's not just a passing hobby, so say you've been doing it for 5+ years already, you actually probably will end up saving money buying one of these solutions, and because it's not going to break. If you buy the consumer belt-driven wheels, I really don't think some of them are going to last more than 5 years. The only exceptions, from my experience, to that rule is the Logitech G25, which is it's a sort of indestructible wheel. So I'd assume the G29 as well should be quite good in terms of its durability. But any of the wheels that use belts and other systems, I would definitely expect them. Well, wrong gear again. I would definitely expect them to not last, 4 or 5 years. Whoa! I mean, this is awesome. I really can't drive this car and track and talk at the same time. Worst choice ever for this video. But say you've had a bad day, you could just load into Assetto Corsa, pop your VR headset on, block the world out, and load this up, and it's extraordinary. This car does have a little, pulling out that corner, it has a little bit of an oscillation, but to be fair, I think you do see, when you watch them absolutely chucking these cars around the track on old YouTube videos of the races, you notice them doing that bit of a sway coming out of some of the corners. And again, it's like that. The car, you really do with the direct drive wheels get a much better sense of the car's individual personality and how to work with that personality. Of course, though I think direct drive wheels, do make you more consistent. They do make driving easier. They're not going to turn you into an alien. If you're getting to that alien level of sim racing, you're essentially already driving way above the bounds of normal driving, even compared to what would be a realistic real world approach to driving. They really are. I think they're probably driving faster than the actual internal latency of USB and the delays that go through there, in terms of they've already planned the action on the steering wheel, the braking and everything, way before the simulators actually put anything out to their equipment. They're probably even accounting for the latency of the equipment going into the game. So, it won't turn you into Greg or Hutu, but to be honest, I don't think many people ever really have an expectation that they're going to be a Terminator when it comes to driving simulators. And the type of people that are likely to want to buy a direct drive wheel are either going to be people that want to sort of train a bit of strength, have something that's a little bit closer to real world for real world training application, and then set it up specifically for what they do in real world and get it as analogous as possible. And then people like myself that are really sort of looking for whatever adds to the immersive qualities of the sim racing experience, and you know, that's why I've got a VR headset on my face, and that's why I'm in love with the with direct drive wheels. But on that note, well, you know what? I'm just going to keep driving. I don't want to stop. Oh dear God, the world has decided to stop for me. There we go, and that's how game. Oh, there's the ambulance. Perfect. Hello. Please, please take me out of the vehicle. I'm paralysed. But there you go. That is essentially the SW20. You know what it adds to Assetto Corsa with Assetto Corsa, and of course we went through the settings. Feel free to just drop any questions underneath the video in the video description, in the comment section. I'll answer questions you've got about this wheel, about Assetto Corsa. Of course, you can also follow us on Twitch where we do our live streaming, so you can catch us on there. But yes, there we go. What a rant! I think that's a world record for me, this video, in terms of length and talking. Until the next one, have a good day, everybody. Subscribe and like. Goodbye.